September 1943. Rabaul Airfield on the island of New Britain in the southwest Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai reviewed intelligence documents in the operations tent. His remaining functional eye scanning reports about American fighter development. Sakai had lost his other eye to defensive fire from American gunners during combat operations in 1942. The intelligence summary described a new United States Navy fighter aircraft designated F6F Hellcat. According to the report, this aircraft weighed approximately twice as much as the Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter that Japanese naval aviation had operated since 1940. The document characterized the American design as excessively heavy and fundamentally flawed. Outside the tent, Sakai could observe his squadron's Zero fighters positioned on pierced steel planking. These aircraft had established air superiority across the Pacific Theater since December 1941. British Hurricane fighters, American Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, and Dutch Brewster Buffalo fighters had all proven inferior in combat against the Zero. Japanese intelligence analysts concluded that the new American Hellcat would fail similarly. What Sakai and other Imperial Japanese Navy officers did not know in September 1943 was that within 30 days, the F6F Hellcat would begin systematically destroying Japanese naval aviation. Historical records indicate the Hellcat achieved a kill-to-loss ratio of 19:1 during World War II, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft, while losing only 270 F-6Fs to enemy fighters in air-to-air combat. This aircraft would fundamentally transform carrier-based warfare, eliminate Japanese air superiority, and demonstrate that the Zero's early dominance had been built on tactical and strategic assumptions that could not survive contact with American industrial capacity and revised combat doctrine. If you appreciate detailed evidence-based World War II history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. The confidence of Japanese naval aviators in September 1943 was based on quantifiable combat results. Since the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that appeared to validate their aircraft design philosophy and pilot training methods. At Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347 American aircraft on the ground and in the air. During operations in the Philippines, Japanese aviation lost 7 aircraft while destroying 103. In the February 1942 raids on Darwin, Australia, Japanese forces lost 2 aircraft while destroying 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm was eliminated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force ceased to exist as a fighting force within days of the Japanese invasion. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero represented revolutionary design priorities when it entered service in 1940. American engineers who examined captured Zero fighters in 1942 initially questioned whether the performance data could be accurate. The Zero combined the range of a bomber aircraft, the maneuverability characteristics of a biplane, and sufficient firepower to destroy any opponent it engaged. This combination appeared to violate fundamental engineering principles. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would eventually be credited with 87 confirmed victories, described the Zero in diary entries recovered after the war. He characterized flying the Zero as an extension of the pilot's own body, where the aircraft responded to minimal control inputs. Nishizawa considered American fighters to be powerful but fundamentally clumsy, built with excessive weight like American automobiles rather than optimized for combat performance. The Zero achieved its performance characteristics through specific design decisions. The airframe utilized extra super duralumin, a classified aluminum alloy that created a structure approximately 30% lighter than comparable American designs. The Zero incorporated no armor plate to protect the pilot. The fuel tanks were not self-sealing, which saved additional weight. Japanese pilots sometimes removed the radio equipment to save 30 kilograms. Every component was evaluated for its weight-to-performance ratio. The design philosophy sacrificed survivability for maximum performance. Technical specifications for the A6M20 included a loaded weight of 2,630 kilograms, 5,800 pounds, wing area of 22.44 square meters, 241.5 square feet, and a Nakajima Sakai 12 engine producing 940 horsepower. The wing loading was 10.8 kilograms per square meter, 22 pounds per square foot, which provided a turning radius of approximately 186 meters, 612 feet. Maximum speed was 533 kilometers per hour, 331 miles per hour, at 4,550 meters, 14,130 feet. Range exceeded 3,000 kilometers, 1,900 miles, with external drop tanks. Armament consisted of two 7.7mm machine guns in the fuselage and two 20mm cannons in the wings. Reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence services through neutral sources in early 1943. The specifications appeared either as propaganda or deliberate misinformation. The Hellcat's loaded weight was listed as 5,528 kilograms, 12,186 pounds, more than double the Zero's weight. The wing area measured 31 square meters, 334 square feet. The aircraft was powered by a Pratt Whitney R-2800 double Wasp radial engine. The Hellcat carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate throughout the fuselage, bulletproof glass and self-sealing fuel tanks containing 946 liters, 250 gallons. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical officer who had planned the Pearl Harbor attack, reviewed these specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in Japanese defense archives, concluded that the Americans had learned nothing from earlier combat experience. Genda characterized the Hellcat as a continuation of failed American design philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill through weight of machinery. He calculated that a Zero would be able to fly circles around the Hellcat in any turning engagement. The mathematics appeared to support Genda's assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 10.8 kilograms per square meter provided exceptional maneuverability. The Hellcat's wing loading of 17.9 kilograms per square meter, 36.5 pounds per square foot, suggested a turning radius exceeding 274 meters, 900 feet. Japanese fighter tactics were based entirely on turning combat. By this analysis, the Hellcat would be unable to engage Japanese fighters effectively. Japanese intelligence analysts did not understand that American designers had abandoned turning combat as the primary tactical doctrine. The Hellcat was not designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to make turning unnecessary. On September 30, 1943, Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission near Marcus Island when he observed 6 dark blue aircraft climbing from the southeast. His initial assessment, recorded in his after-action report, was that these were B-25 Mitchell medium bombers on an unusual heading. When the aircraft turned, Fukui identified them as single-engine fighters with large fuselages and relatively short wings. This was his first encounter with F6F type fighters. Fukui's report noted his initial impression that the Americans had mounted fighter guns on torpedo bomber airframes. Fukui engaged using standard Japanese tactics, which emphasized using the Zero's superior turning radius to position behind enemy aircraft. He rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve into a 6 o'clock firing position. Instead, the Hellcat executed an unexpected maneuver. Rather than attempting to turn with the Zero or fleeing, the Hellcat went vertical. The Pratt Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Nakajima Sakai's 1,130 horsepower. This power differential drove the Hellcat upward at approximately 1,067 meters per minute, 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui attempted to follow, but watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled to maintain vertical climb. At 4,572 meters, 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a hammerhead turn that positioned it directly behind Fukui's aircraft. Fukui reported that the American opened fire at 400 meters with 6 machine guns rather than the 4 guns Japanese intelligence had predicted. The volume of fire was unprecedented. His aircraft sustained 17 hits within 3 seconds. Fukui survived only by entering an inverted spin. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao Izuka, did not return. The reconnaissance aircraft they were escorting was also lost. This engagement represented the first combat victories credited to the F6F Hellcat. On October 5, 1943, Task Force 14 conducted airstrikes against Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zero fighters from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another limited American raid. American carrier forces had conducted hit-and-run attacks for months, typically withdrawing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This engagement would differ significantly. Shiga recorded in his diary that his formation climbed to 6,096 meters, 20,000 feet. Below the Japanese fighters, 12 F6F Hellcats operated in 3 4-aircraft divisions. The Japanese held every tactical advantage: altitude, position, and surprise. By Japanese tactical doctrine, victory was certain. The engagement that followed contradicted Japanese tactical expectations. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters did not scatter or attempt turning combat. They maintained formation discipline and accelerated in a gentle dive that preserved their energy state. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, the Hellcats absorbed the punishment. The Hellcats' armor protection included 96 kilograms, 212 pounds, of plate protecting the pilot, 50 kilograms, 110 pounds, around the oil system, and self-sealing fuel tanks that could sustain multiple hits without catastrophic failure. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Rather than engaging in turning combat, they used their weight as a tactical advantage. Climbing at full power, they reached altitudes where the Zero's engine struggled to maintain performance due to reduced oxygen density. At 7,620 meters, 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was reduced to approximately 900 horsepower. Shiga wrote that the Hellcats descended on the Zeros with overwhelming speed advantage. The American fighters would dive, fire their 6 heavy machine guns, then climb away before the Zeros could react effectively. 8 Zero fighters were shot down in this engagement. No Hellcats were lost. This engagement demonstrated that American tactical doctrine had fundamentally changed. On November 11, 1943, at Rabaul, pilots of the 204th Air Group assembled for a tactical briefing conducted by Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanimizu. Tanimizu, credited with 32 victories, was among the few Japanese pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcat fighters. His briefing addressed the changing nature of air combat in the Pacific. Tanimizu instructed the assembled pilots to disregard previous tactical training. The Americans had changed the fundamental rules of air combat. They no longer engaged in turning fights. Tanimizu characterized American tactics as those of executioners rather than warriors. This represented a significant departure from Japanese military culture, which emphasized individual combat skill and warrior spirit. Tanimizu explained what Japanese pilots were learning through costly experience. The Hellcat was not designed to defeat the Zero in turning combat. It was designed to make turning combat irrelevant. American pilots employed what military analysts call energy fighting, maintaining speed and altitude advantage, then converting potential energy to kinetic energy in high-speed slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no opportunity to exploit their superior maneuverability. Tanimizu described the American tactical formation, pairs of aircraft operating with one high and one low. While a Zero pilot engaged one Hellcat, the second would already be diving into a firing position. The Hellcat's radio equipment, which Japanese designers had considered wasteful weight, enabled perfect coordination between aircraft. Japanese pilots operated as individual warriors. American pilots functioned as a coordinated system. By December 1943, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, served as air operations officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of damaged Zero fighters returning from encounters with Hellcats revealed an increasing technology gap between Japanese and American aviation. The disparity in firepower was quantifiable. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 heavy machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, 4,500 rounds per minute total. Each 50 caliber, 12.7 meters bullet weighed 46 grams and traveled at 884 meters per second, 2,900 feet per second, delivering 4,145 joules, 3,500 foot-pounds, of energy on impact. The Zero's two 7.7-meter machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grams at 701 meters per second, 2,300 feet per second, 1,017 joules, 750 foot-pounds of energy. The Hellcat's guns delivered more than 4 times the energy per projectile and more than 10 times the total volume of fire. More concerning to Japanese commanders were reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. Japanese pilots relied on visual detection to locate enemy aircraft. Hellcat pilots were directed to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could detect Japanese aircraft from 80 kilometers, 50 miles away. This system provided American fighters with complete situational awareness before visual contact. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first experience with radar-directed interception. His formation was climbing through cloud cover when Hellcats attacked from above with no warning and no visual contact beforehand. The American fighters dove precisely on the Japanese formation's heading, perfectly positioned for attack. The Hellcats knew the Japanese aircraft's location, altitude, and course. Komachi characterized this as blind men fighting opponents who could see in darkness. By January 1944, the Japanese pilot training system had entered crisis. The pre-war Imperial Japanese Navy pilot training program had been among the world's most demanding. Training required 3 years, with pilots entering combat with 700 flight hours. Army pilots received minimum 500 hours. These aviators were highly skilled in aerobatics, gunnery, and tactical formation flying. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with 300 hours of flight time. Army pilots received 200 hours. Fuel shortages meant most training was conducted in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, and radio procedures were eliminated from training to accelerate pilot production. Meanwhile, American pilots arrived at combat units with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in type-specific aircraft. They had fired thousands of practice rounds. Carrier landing practice continued until the procedure became automatic. They learned energy fighting tactics in safety over training airfields in Texas and Florida. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigara Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report that Japan was sending inadequately trained pilots to fight professionals. He cited the example of Ensign Yamamoto, who arrived at the front without having fired his guns in flight. No ammunition was available for practice. Yamamoto had never flown at night. No fuel was available for such training. Hashimoto recorded that Yamamoto lasted 7 minutes in his first combat engagement. On June 19, 1944, the Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, intended as the decisive battle that would destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 Japanese carriers with 450 aircraft, including their best remaining pilots, engaged Task Force 58. 15 American carriers with 956 aircraft, of which 450 were F6F Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would prevail. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 0830 hours. American radar detected this formation at 241 kilometers, 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with optimal positioning, altitude advantage, sun position favorable, approaching from Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, observed the Hellcats minutes before engagement. He reported they were stacked from 6,096 to 9,144 meters, 20,000 to 30,000 feet. At least 60 aircraft, positioned like a steel curtain. The Japanese formation was at 5,186 meters, 18,000 feet. Every tactical advantage belonged to the Americans. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft in the first wave, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, Commander Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft that day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, destroyed 6. McCampbell reported that when Zeros attempted turning combat, the Hellcats simply refused to engage on those terms. The Americans would execute high side runs, shoot down an enemy aircraft, then zoom, climb back to altitude. Zeros attempting to follow would stall and another Hellcat would destroy them. By day's end, Japanese losses totaled 346 carrier aircraft plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses were 30 aircraft from all causes: combat, operational accidents, and fuel exhaustion. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term Turkey Shoot to describe the engagement. Enemy aircraft had been as defenseless as game birds against trained hunters. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Commander David McCampbell established his single-mission record. Leading 7 Hellcats from USS Essex, he intercepted a formation of 60 Japanese aircraft heading toward the American fleet. In the subsequent 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers. His wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. McCampbell recorded that he exhausted his ammunition after the 9th victory. The Hellcat performed without fault throughout the engagement. Despite being outnumbered 8-1, his aircraft sustained no hits. This engagement demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority that had occurred since 1941. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell's performance, 7 victories on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. He finished the war as the United States Navy's leading ace with 34 confirmed victories. His success exemplified how American tactical doctrine and aircraft capability had combined to negate Japanese numerical advantages. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote that American radar-guided fighter direction achieved what Japanese planners thought impossible: the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast system. Japanese pilots, regardless of skill level, were engaging not aircraft, but an integrated system of radar detection, radio communication, and coordinated tactics. The pilot shortage became catastrophic by early 1945. Training was reduced to 40-50 hours for Navy pilots, 60-70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40-50 hours total, approximately 1 week of training. These pilots had never fired their guns, never practiced formation flying, and barely understood basic flight controls. They were expected to find American ships and crash into them deliberately. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented ultimate admission of Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan converted its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, originator of the kamikaze program, justified it with mathematical logic. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success approaches 0. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting the target increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death accomplishes something. During Operation Iceberg, the American invasion of Okinawa from April to June 1945, Japan launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet. The Hellcat transitioned from air superiority fighter to defender against suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations, using 4 aircraft divisions in coordinated attacks, made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. Valencia explained the mowing machine tactic his division developed. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 91 meters, 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his assigned sector. The division would make one pass, climb back to altitude and repeat. This tactic eliminated the need for individual dogfighting and maximized the Hellcat's firepower advantage. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were definitive. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.5-to-1 ratio. More significantly, Hellcats prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. Without Hellcat protection, American naval losses at Okinawa would have been catastrophic. By 1945, the technological gap had become insurmountable. The F6F Hellcat variant incorporated improvements that increased lethality. Water injection boosted engine power to 2,200 horsepower. Zero-length rocket launchers added ground attack capability. Additional armor protected critical systems. The K-14 computing gun sight calculated deflection automatically, significantly increasing hit probability. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with confirmed victories, variously estimated between 15 and 28, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and extensive combat experience, he was nearly killed in his first engagement with Hellcats. Sakai wrote in his autobiography that he performed his best aerobatics, loops, rolls, splits maneuvers, every technique he had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. Sakai survived only because the American pilot made an error, forgetting to release his external drop tank before combat, which reduced the Hellcat's performance below optimal. Sakai's experience demonstrated that even Japan's most skilled pilots could not overcome the Hellcat's systematic advantages. Individual skill, which had been paramount in 1941, had become irrelevant by 1944. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had established unprecedented statistical dominance. The aircraft destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, while losing 270 Hellcats to enemy fighters, a kill ratio of 19.3 to 1. Hellcats produced 305 United States Navy aces. The aircraft accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories during World War II. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of approximately 18,000 naval aviators who had begun the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The attrition rate exceeded 99%. This represented not just loss of personnel, but elimination of institutional knowledge, tactical expertise, and training capability. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's leading ace, escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki. Nishizawa claimed his 86th and 87th victories during this mission, 2 F6F Hellcats. The next day, October 26th, Nishizawa died as a passenger, aboard a transport aircraft shot down by Hellcats from Fighting Squadron 14. Japan's greatest ace, unable to defend himself without a fighter, fell to the aircraft he had briefly bested. This incident symbolized the totality of Hellcat dominance. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito broadcast the surrender announcement. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who had dismissed the Hellcat in 1943 as excessive weight over tactical finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him were the remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenage pilots with 40 hours of flight time and aircraft assembled from salvaged parts with empty fuel tanks. That same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of Fighting Squadron 31, flying from USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 1,400 hours, the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. In September 1945, the first American aircraft to land at Atsugi Airfield after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to observe their adversary up close for the first time. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Veith, an ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots, his aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart structurally, left observers speechless. Veith told Japanese pilots through an interpreter that this demonstration wasn't pushing the aircraft's limits. In combat with water injection, the engine was 20% more powerful. The airframe was stressed for 13 Gs. Veith stated he had never managed to break a Hellcat structurally, despite extensive combat experience. Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt Whitney R-2800 engine contained 2,804 precision-machined parts, each component interchangeable with any other R-2800 engine. The Nakajima Sakai engine required hand-fitting of components. No two engines were exactly alike, which complicated maintenance and limited production efficiency. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was professionally devastating. Horikoshi stated that Japanese engineers had designed an aircraft for 1941 conditions. Americans had designed an aircraft system for 1945 requirements. While Japan was perfecting the sword, America was building the industrial age. This assessment acknowledged that the competition had not been between aircraft, but between industrial philosophies. Grumman's production of the Hellcat became a weapon in itself. The Bethpage, New York factory operated continuously, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months, a feat Japan could not comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone, nearly 7 times Japanese production. The production system included innovations that Japanese observers found incomprehensible, workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components, shifts operating around the clock with consistent quality despite speed, and quality control maintaining standards despite mass production rates. This production disparity meant that even if Japanese and American aircraft had been equal in capability, which they were not, the mathematical outcome would have been identical. Japan could not replace losses. America could replace losses faster than Japan could inflict them. The Hellcat didn't just win battles. It revolutionized naval warfare doctrine. Pre-war theory assumed aircraft carriers were vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to survive. The Hellcat inverted this assumption. Carriers became fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, understood this transformation. He stated that with the Hellcat, American forces didn't need to locate enemy forces first. The Americans could allow the enemy to approach, confident that F6Fs would destroy them at American convenience. This confidence enabled unprecedented offensive operations. American carriers could operate off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat combat air patrols making them essentially invulnerable to air attack. This strategic shift changed the fundamental nature of carrier operations. Instead of mobile striking forces that must attack first and withdraw, carriers became mobile air bases that could sustain operations indefinitely in hostile waters. This capability made the island-hopping campaign possible and enabled the direct approach to the Japanese home islands. Beyond technology and tactics, the Hellcat represented a cultural philosophy that invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and acceptance of death. The Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and preservation of pilot life. This philosophical gulf meant Japanese pilots could not adapt to Hellcat tactics even when they understood them intellectually. The concept of refusing combat when disadvantaged, fundamental to Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots trained in Bushido code. A warrior who retreated from combat, even when tactically sound, violated fundamental cultural principles. American military culture prioritized preservation of trained pilots. Armor, self-sealing tanks, and tactical doctrine all aimed to bring pilots home alive. Japanese culture accepted pilot death as inevitable and sometimes honorable. This cultural difference manifested in design decisions. The Zero sacrificed all protection for performance, while the Hellcat sacrificed some performance for survivability. In a war of attrition, the side that preserved its pilots prevailed. In 1962, the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered to discuss the conflict with historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply that the Hellcat won the Pacific Air War period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made American victory inevitable. Commander Saburo Sakai responded with his own assessment. The Zero was a superior fighter aircraft, Sakai acknowledged. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. Japanese forces never understood this difference until too late. Sakai stated that Japan brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why they lost. This metaphor captured the essential asymmetry, not between equivalent weapons, but between fundamentally different approaches to warfare. The Hellcat's dominance can be expressed in mathematical terms that reveal the profound transformation of Pacific air warfare. Overall kill ratio 19-1. Kill ratio specifically against Zeros 13-1. Hellcats produced 1943-1945, 12,275 units in 30 months. Zeros produced 1943-1945, approximately 6,000 units. American pilots trained on Hellcats, over 5,000. Japanese pilots remaining August 1945, fewer than 100 combat capable. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who commanded the Japanese fleet at the Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest assessment. Japanese forces laughed at the Hellcat initially because they didn't understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to warfare. By the time Japanese pilots stopped laughing, their air forces had ceased to exist. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, who lived until 2000, provided final assessment in his last interview. He stated that the Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. Japanese pilots thought they were samurai. The Hellcat showed them they were men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That, Sakai concluded, is the ultimate defeat existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armor the Zero didn't have, powered by an engine Japan couldn't build, armed with weapons Japan couldn't match, guided by radars Japan couldn't detect, flown by pilots Japan couldn't train adequately, and produced in numbers Japan couldn't comprehend. Japanese pilots laughed at the Hellcat in 1943 because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness, but the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to final letters home, their mockery to kamikaze missions, their confidence to complete collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zero, it had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots laughed at the F6F Hellcat in September 1943. The Hellcat had the last word. It always did.